His latest jokes are about skeletons. And this isn't supposed to be recorded. So what did one skeleton say to the other skeleton as they sat down to eat dinner? Bon appetit. It's my 8-year-old now. And the other one was, why was the skeleton afraid to cross the road? No guts. All right, Mr. Carnahan is coming, right?
Yep.
Take it? Okay. We'll wait for the ranking member for a moment. Anyone else have a good joke they want to share with the... Now, Mr. Ambassador, you're supposed to be prepared for this.
You have the advantage of me.
Okay. Well, as soon as one of our ranking members or Democratic members come, we'll gavel it in. And so there's this story about these two guys who get arrested in Cuba, and they're thrown down into a dungeon. Now stop me, Mr. Ambassador, if you've heard this. So they're thrown in the dungeon. Every day, the jailers come down and take out a couple of guys out of the dungeon, and they line them up against the wall. Firing squad comes out and shoots them. And finally, after a couple of weeks, they're the only two guys left. And there's the Carnegie. I'm so glad he's here. You got here just in time for the punchline. So they haul them out, the two guys out, and they put them up against the wall, and the firing squad marches out, and they put the rifles up, and all of a sudden a limousine pulls up, and Fidel Castro jumps out of the limousine. And he runs up to these guys and say, "Gusanos, you're going to die today." And one of them steps forward and spits right in Castro's face and said, "You vicious dictator, you're going to burn in hell." And the other guy grabbed him by the arm and says, "Wait a minute, are you trying to get us in trouble?" There you go. That was part of the testimony today. All right. All of that was
on the record?
That was off the record. Okay. Okay. This hearing is called to order. The Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee of the House International Relations Committee. And on February 17th, the first 400 Ashraf MEK members began to relocate from our 2 Camp Liberty, which is also now called Camp Hariva, a former U.S. military base near Baghdad International Airport. This was in accordance with an agreement between the United States and Iraq signed on Christmas Day. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees was formally recognized and has formally recognized the residents of Ashraf as asylum seekers and persons of concern, which entitles them to protection and humane treatment. Since February, over half of the Camp Ashraf residents have been shifted to Camp Liberty for UNHCR processing with the aim of moving them out of Iraq to safety in other countries. At a court hearing here in the District of Columbia on May 8th, a State Department lawyer trying to defend the continued listing of the MEK as a terrorist organization claimed that Camp Ashraf had never been inspected by U.S. forces. His implication is that the MEK might not have lived up to its part of the 2003 bargain by which it disarmed in exchange for U.S. protection. The reaction at Camp Ashraf has been for the MEK to halt movement to Camp Liberty and demand an inspection to prove that they are not armed. If the inspection does not take place until after Camp Ashraf is evacuated, false evidence can be planted in the empty camp by Iraqi authorities or Iranian agents. So it would have to take place now while the camp is still in MEK hands. I would like to know whether the State Department understood the possible effects of their lawyer's argument. Earlier reports implied that matters might be improving and might actually be moving in the right direction towards a delisting of the MEK, but now the whole issue is up in the air for no good reason. As to the movement that has already taken place, the MEK members have complained that water is in short supply at Camp Liberty. Electricity is also a problem as the camp is not connected to the national grid and the residents rely on small generators. And there are reports that their personal possessions are being looted by Iraqi troops who have not allowed them to move everything to Camp Liberty. Severe restrictions have been placed on the ability of those at Camp Liberty to communicate with the outside world or to see their lawyers. Living conditions are austere, and Iraqi security forces have deployed armored vehicles and heavy weapons around and in the camp. As of May 10th, only 323 MEK members had been interviewed by the UNHCR, and will Iraq allow such a slow pace to continue, and will Iran allow that? If this slow pace continues, MEK people will be put in jeopardy. Iraqi hostility and Iranian plotting must be taken seriously in the wake of the April 8, 2011 attack on Camp Ashraf by Iraqi forces that murdered 34 unarmed civilians and wounded over 300 others. Iraq may have promised the UNHCR that there would be no forced return of the MEK members to Iran, but can the Maliki government be trusted given its bloody record? For the record, I have been denied permission to hold investigative hearings on the massacre at Camp Ashraf and to explore why the MEK is still designated as a terrorist organization. It is of great concern that roadblocks have been placed to prevent this Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee from doing its job when it comes to this aspect of American foreign policy. Here to give us an update on the situation in Iraq is Ambassador Daniel Fried, and the State Department's special advisor on Camp Ashraf. Before assuming this position, he was special envoy for the closure of Guantanamo detainee facility. Prior to that, he served from 2005-2009 as Assistant Secretary for the State for European and Eurasian Affairs, a career member of the Foreign Service, which he joined in 1977. He has served on the National Security Councils of President Obama and Clinton, and was ambassador to Poland from November 1997 to May of 2000, not a calm period in Polish history. So we have with us today a real troubleshooter, proving that they all don't look like John Wayne. And with that, Mr. Carnahan, would you have an opening statement as well?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize I didn't bring any good jokes to start off with. But
I thought I'd get a laugh out of that John Wayne line.
anyway, I do want to say thank you to the chairman for his persistence on this issue. And this is the third hearing in the past year on Camp Ashraf. Ambassador Fried, thank you for testifying again in front of this subcommittee. This hearing provides a timely opportunity for us to check on the processing status of the residents at the camp. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank many of my constituents from back home in St. Louis, Missouri for their work on this important issue. They are a great example of citizens being involved to make a difference for those in need. In 2003, the residents of Camp Ashraf were granted protected status under the Geneva Convention. Pursuant to the Status of Forces Agreement between the U.S. and the Iraqi governments, however, jurisdiction of the camp has been under the jurisdiction of the Iraqi government since 2009. And since late December 2011, The agreement allowing the residents to be moved to Camp Liberty, approximately 2/3 of all residents have been relocated. Ambassador, I will be especially interested to hear about the progress that has been made through our bilateral and multilateral efforts to move the remaining residents, as well as an update on the interviews and refugee status determinations by the UNHCR. Reports suggest that UNHCR's process of conducting individual interviews is going slowly, as are the refugee status determinations that need to be made in order to provide for their permanent relocation. It has become clear this process is going to take longer than expected and longer than most RSDs conducted by UNHCR. It is imperative that there is sufficient time to ensure that this is done in an orderly manner, that it also guarantees the safety of the residents. I'm interested to hear what discussions are being undertaken to ensure that this process will be allowed to continue beyond any predetermined time deadlines. Certainly a long-term solution for the residents is of course needed once UNHCR completes its interviews and refugee status determinations. It would be beneficial to hear some of the long-term possibilities, including what conversations have been had with the residents. I'd also be interested to hear about what Camp Ashraf in the broader context of U.S. policy toward Iraq. While the safety of the residents of Camp Ashraf pose immediate concern, I'd also like to hear the witnesses discuss how our relationship with Iraq has been affected, as well as how it's impacted the Camp Ashraf issue. I look forward to hearing from you today. Thank you again for being here, Ambassador.
Thank you. Another member of the committee, Judge Poe from Texas. You are welcome to make as long opening remarks as you would choose.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having this hearing. Ambassador Free, thank you for being here. I also want to thank many friends from Texas and other parts of the country that are here today who are concerned about their families, their loved ones, and other patriots in Camp Ashraf and Camp Liberty. 4 years ago, the MEK filed their petition against the State Department to delist them as a foreign terrorist organization. It's been 2 years since the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled the State Department violated the MEK's due process rights. And so since 2011, June the 6th, the ball has been in the State Department's court. The State Department's only reason for disregarding the law is that they apparently are too busy with other things. The latest excuse is that the Secretary is waiting for Camp Ashraf to close. I wonder what difference that makes. Now we hear a new excuse, that there are worries from the State Department about alleged weapons in the camp. But on June 18, 2003, U.S. General Rayburn said that the MEK has been completely disarmed, I further quote, and we have taken up all small arms and heavy equipment. That was our own U.S. military general stating he was completely confident there were no weapons in Camp Ashraf. And just yesterday, U.S. Brigadier General David Phillips said he, quote, systematically searched every square kilometer of the 36 square kilometer facility with American troops in 2003 and found no weapons. Two generals are on record that they completely searched the camp. So why is the State Department now alleging that there are weapons in the camp? Produce one of those weapons, any weapon that has allegedly been found in that camp, but yet they don't appear, probably because they don't exist. Does the State Department believe the residents rearmed while they were under U.S. control from 2003 to 2008, or that they rearmed after we left? That's, of course, unlikely and absurd, given twice when the camp was attacked by the Iraqis with automatic weapons and dozens of residents in Camp Ashraf were killed and murdered. No weapons were ever used by those residents to defend themselves. All they had were rocks, and they threw rocks when they could to protect themselves and their families. So are the rocks the weapons the State Department's concerned about? We don't know. And once the camp is closed, will the State Department be given permission by the government of Iraq to inspect the camp? And who's to say, as the chairman pointed out, that the Iraqis or the Iranians even wouldn't actually plant weapons in the camp when the camp is vacated? There are lots of questions and problems with State Department's latest excuse not to make a decision on the FTO status of the MEK. 4 years later, the State Department is still denying the due process rights of the MEK. It's time for the decision. The time for delay is over. No pistols, no rifles, no bazookas, no BB gun, no slingshot has been found in Camp Ashraf. Where are the weapons that they say exist? It appears to me the State Department's playing into the politics of the Iranian mullahs and the Iraqi Prime Minister Maliki. State must pick a horse and ride it. Hopefully they'll pick the side of the citizens of Camp Ashraf, Camp Liberty, and not the side of the little fella from the desert, Ahmadinejad. And I'll yield back to the chairman.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. And let me note that we will have Ambassador Fried will give his opening remarks. We will then have questions and answers from the panel here, from our committee members, after which, at the adjournment of this hearing, we were not permitted to have a second panel of witnesses. So what we will do is we will adjourn immediately after this testimony. This subcommittee will be adjourned at that moment, and at that moment after adjournment, General David Phillips, who was assigned to have duty and overseen Camp Ashraf while he was in the military, will be here taking that seat and offering us a briefing on the information that he knows about and was permitted to testify yesterday before another committee. So with that said, we will proceed, and Mr. Ambassador, you may take what time you find appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Rohrabacher, Ranking Member Carnahan, Judge Poe, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I wish to report to you on progress in the administration's efforts to support a humane, peaceful, and durable solution for the residents of Camp Ashraf, as well as on challenges that remain. When I appeared before this subcommittee last December, a humanitarian crisis appeared imminent. The government of Iraq had announced its intention to close Camp Ashraf by December 31st, and there were valid concerns that this could result in bloodshed. Members of this committee appeared to share such concerns. It was under these circumstances that Secretary Clinton instructed me to work with Ambassador Jeffrey and the United Nations to avert a humanitarian catastrophe. I am relieved to report significant progress while recognizing that the job is not yet done. On December 25th, the government of Iraq and the United Nations signed a memorandum of understanding that provides a way forward for the safe relocation of Ashraf residents out of Iraq. Secretary Clinton quickly announced support for this MOU. We called upon the Iraqi government to respect the terms of the MOU and upon the residents of Camp Ashraf to cooperate in its implementation. With the signature of the MOU, the Iraqi government lifted the December 31st deadline for Ashraf's closure. Under the terms of the MOU, the residents of Camp Ashraf gained a temporary transit facility, Camp Huria, formerly Camp Liberty, adjacent to the Baghdad International Airport, to which to relocate under guarantees of security. The MOU also provides for in-person monitoring by the UN Assistance Mission in Iraq, UNAMI, headed by the able and energetic Ambassador Martin Kobler, and a refugee status determination process undertaken by the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, that's UNHCR. Additionally, through the MOU, the Iraqi government made a commitment to the principle of non-refoulement. These were important steps forward by the Iraqi government. The first convoy to Huria took place on February 17-18 with nearly 400 people. A second and similar convoy occurred on March 8th, followed by a third convoy on March 19th, a fourth on April 16th, and a fifth convoy on May 5. Nearly 2,000 residents have moved to Camp Huria, over half the total. Each convoy has been a significant logistic undertaking. The Iraqi government has provided dozens of coach buses and cargo trucks, and thousands of Iraqi security forces have provided for convoy security on the road. The preparation of each convoy is lengthy, and disagreements, sometimes heated, have occurred between the Iraqi authorities and the residents about cargo screening procedures and other issues. U.S. Embassy and the Department of State follow the progress of each convoy closely. The progress to date is remarkable, especially given the history and emotions involved. But patience and compromise have been required and will still be required as the last convoys to close Camp Ashraf are organized. Living conditions at Camp Huria have also had challenges. There were early issues with water, sewage, and electric power, though many have been resolved since. There were early concerns about the location and size of Iraqi police units at Camp Huria, though here too a resolution was worked out. Both Camps Ashraf and Huria have internet connectivity to the world. There are issues that remain. For example, the government of Iraq needs to pay greater attention to the repair or provision of air conditioning units and other basic welfare needs, such as accommodations for the disabled. With the onset of hot weather and new arrivals, electric power and water needs will increase, and the number of required utility vehicles will grow. The Iraqi government can work with the UN to address these concerns. The residents need to engage the Iraqi government, the UN, and others on these issues in a focused manner. It is important that the final convoys from Ashraf take place and that Camp Ashraf be closed. Our efforts do not end, however, with Camp Ashraf's closure. Indeed, we must not lose sight of our purpose. The relocation of Camp Ashraf's residents out of Iraq and the way for those residents out of Iraq lies through the UNHCR process. With startup issues being resolved, the UNHCR has intensified its efforts and increased resources to interview and review residents for refugee status eligibility. The next great task in this effort requires continued participation of the residents in the UNHCR process and the diplomatic work of relocating residents out of Iraq. The United States has informed the UNHCR and our international partners that we will receive UNHCR's referrals of some individuals. These referrals will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, consistent with applicable U.S. law. Other governments have stated their intention to take similar actions, and some have begun the process of reviewing residents themselves. Let me be clear. Mr. Chairman, it will be critical for the United States to demonstrate leadership in this area. Our doing so will be essential to finding a solution. We hope to have the support of the Congress and of all those who have expressed concern for the residents of Camp Ashraf. We will also need the continued cooperation of remaining Ashraf residents to relocate swiftly to Huria and continued cooperation of the residents of Camp Huria with the UNHCR. The next stage of this process will be challenging. Some in Camp Huria may choose to return voluntarily to Iran. Others may find that they have credentials and connections to European or other nations and can resettle there. Still others will require resettlement as refugees or other permission to reside in third countries through the UNHCR's good offices. Some of our European partners have indicated that they will interview residents to determine eligibility for resettlement within their respective countries. The United States will encourage prompt and secure relocation of the residents of Huria, and again, we must be prepared to do our part, hopefully with the support of the Congress. I want to commend the extraordinary work being done by UNAMI and UNHCR missions in Iraq, and the intense engagement of U.S. Ambassador Jeffrey and his dedicated team. Their diligence, creativity, and commitment have been essential to the progress so far. Mr. Chairman, Judge Poe, this is in the nature of an interim report. Much has been achieved since we met last December. Much remains to be done. But at last, we are on a road to resolve this problem through the relocation of Ashraf residents out of Iraq. Thank you for this opportunity, and I welcome your questions.
right, thank you very much for your testimony. The ranking member will be returning, but we will proceed with his permission. And let me get down to the first issue about weapons in Camp Ashraf. Does the United States government in any way question that there are no weapons and have been no weapons in Camp Ashraf since the agreement that was made by the residents, by the MEK, back in 2003?
Mr. Chairman, this issue, that is the issue of Camp Ashraf and inspections, came up, as you said earlier, and I believe Judge Poe said, in the context of litigation in court, in D.C. court, federal court. And because it came up in the process of active litigation, I have to be extraordinarily careful in getting into this area. It is my understanding that the Department of Justice has sent a letter to the court, which has now been filed, and I believe it is therefore available, which answers some of the questions that have arisen, and it's my understanding that that letter addresses the question you just asked.
So you should be able to just tell us right out what it is
Yes.
then.
I have to be extraordinarily careful, but I can say the following. The mandate of my office and my charge from the Secretary is to support the process of having people move from Ashraf to Liberty and then from Liberty out of Iraq in safety and security. That process needs to move forward as fast as we can. Time is not necessarily on our side. I don't want to lose time and opportunity. I think I understand, or some of the concerns that have been raised recently as a result of these court proceedings are unfounded. My government and this administration are determined to move ahead. I hope that the residents of Ashraf will continue to cooperate. I read in an ad that appeared in the Washington Post that an inspection by Ashraf, of Ashraf is an essential condition, I'm quoting, to continue the relocation of Ashraf residents to Liberty. I hope this does not reflect a considered opinion. The cooperation of the residents of Ashraf has brought, and the cooperation of the Iraqi government with the MOU has brought us this far. We're not there, but it's farther than many thought we would get. And we're doing all right considering where we thought we would be in December and where we feared we could end up. We want to move ahead quickly. We have large tasks before us, and it's on those tasks that we're focused. I don't know how the issue came up or why. This issue is filled with misunderstandings. But my focus is moving forward, and it's my strong recommendation to the residents of Ashraf and Camp Liberty and all those who wish them well that we move forward as fast as we can, while we have the chance.
Now let me interpret that. That is, with all of your heart and soul, you're recommending that we ignore the issue and not ask for a response.
Mr. Chairman, I would know better than to recommend that you ignore any issue in which you have an interest. I wouldn't
Well, let me
dare.
put it another way then. I want you to be really careful, because this is really important, and watch every word that you make. Are we satisfied that there weren't weapons in Camp Ashraf after the 2003 agreement and up till now?
The
If we are, I mean, this is really it's not a tough question, meaning it's not, I mean, it's yes or no. I mean, I
I'm
understand
not
there may be
aware.
implications to yes and no, but knowing the truth is certainly, there's this motto, I think somebody said about knowing the truth is going to make you free.
A good
Well,
saying.
I think knowing the truth is really an important part of making policy.
I am aware of no barrier that ought to prevent the process moving forward. The process of convoys, the last remaining convoys out of Ashraf to Huria, the process of UNHCR interviews, and the process of the international community, UN, US.
So are you suggesting then, if we would give an affirmative that there are no weapons there, that in some way would interfere with the relocation of the people who are currently in Camp Ashraf to Camp Liberty? By answering the question, that would interfere.
No, as I understand what you just said, if I get that right, I'm not saying that. I am being extraordinarily cautious because this is a matter of active litigation. Motions are being filed, letters are being sent, and I have to be more careful than I would be if you had asked this question and there were no litigation going on.
Okay, so if I mentioned to you that was the general testified yesterday? Was that, and I believe the general testified that there were no weapons, and he was our man there. So if he's willing to testify that, or he's not testifying, but briefing us on that, he testified yesterday, and I believe under oath. You can't give an answer based on a brigadier general who is in charge of the camp acknowledging that?
It's my understanding that the Department of Defense, which knows this issue in a way that the Department of State does not, had made the judgment that the camp was largely disarmed with no heavy equipment at that time. Now, my mandate is not to go back and review the record of those years. The mandate of my office is to move forward, and it's my hope that the remaining convoys can move ahead.
Let me ask you, does your hesitation to answer the question in a direct fashion have anything to do with the fact that if we were now to go on record as the official government position is that Camp Ashraf was disarmed, that those people who went in and took the lives of over 30 residents of Camp Ashraf would then be guilty of a war crime?
No, not at all. Not at all. My caution is a function of the fact that there is active litigation going on, which I find, means I have to be more careful than even usual.
I'm sure they're glad there wasn't any active litigation going on after Pearl Harbor. We could have never retaliated against the Japanese for Pearl Harbor, I guess. Well, let me ask, I'll go back to reserve the balance of my time to ask questions, and Your Honor, I'm sure you have a few things you'd like to bring up. And now you're dealing with the judge now.
And you're going to have to keep your answers a whole lot simpler than you have with Mr. Chairman. Has the State Department ever asked to search Camp Ashraf, to your knowledge?
The State Department.
The State Department.
Not during the time in which I've been responsible for this position. And I have good, direct knowledge of what's happened since I took my current job in last November.
Is there anything preventing the State Department from searching Camp Ashraf other than Iraqi government saying you can or you can't?
Well, as a practical matter, it's not Camp Ashraf is not it's not our sovereign territory.
I
It's
understand
Iraqi
that.
sovereign territory.
I understand all that.
Our efforts, now, on the ground, I can tell you that we have substantial efforts going on to have our people go to Camp Huria, Camp Liberty. They were there 2 days ago. They're there on a pretty frequent basis. We've had people going up to Camp Ashraf before to meet with people. Our emphasis, we put our resources to work on the current issues of welfare, security of the people at Camp Huria, support of the UNHCR for its refugee processing, support of the convoys. In my judgment, that is where our efforts should be, because to get these people out of Iraq, we have to get them from Ashraf to Huria, and then from Huria out. That's where our emphasis has been. Our resources are substantial, but they're not unlimited. And frankly, everything I know convinces me that our resources are rightly devoted to the here and now, and not to, I don't want to see them or our efforts diverted.
Are you aware that in April 2009, the Iraqi government searched Camp Ashraf with dogs, and then signed a document saying that there were no weapons there, no ammunition there? Are you aware of that?
I've heard that.
There's also a video of the search. Have you seen the video of that search where they found no weapons?
I haven't seen that video.
I don't think it's on YouTube yet, but are you aware of any third party countries that have expressed any willingness to take a resident from Camp Liberty? They said they'll take them.
Yes.
And those countries
on March 23rd, the UNHCR hosted a conference in Geneva, attended by the United States, the Iraqi government, number of European and non-European governments. Many governments expressed a willingness to consider taking people. There were no pledges or promises or numbers, but there were a number of governments that said yes, they were willing to work with the UN and receive referrals from the UNHCR. The United States was one of those governments, but we were not the only government. That is a start. It's not sufficient in itself, but it's a good start from which to build, and it is precisely there, Judge, that we have to throw our efforts.
It seems to me the listing of the MEK as a foreign terrorist organization is one factor that makes countries hesitate to take these residents, even though some of the European countries have delisted the MEK. I think that if there was delisting, that you would have much more cooperation with third-party countries in taking these individuals back. You mentioned in your testimony, my last comment, you mentioned in your testimony about the living conditions. As we talked about last time, Rudy Giuliani, for example, mentioned that Camp Liberty was a concentration camp in conditions. And we're moving this process further down the road. Always takes longer than anyone expects to get the residents from Camp Ashraf, Camp Liberty, and then to somewhere else in the world. What kind of deadline is the Iraqi government giving, given the whole process, and how will that affect the living conditions of the people in Camp Liberty?
The Iraqi government has suggested that as long as the process is moving forward, that is, convoys moving from Ashraf to Camp Huria, and then the UNHCR process moving people and hopefully out of Camp Huria, and I should add that a few have left. As long as that process is going forward, there has been much less talk of a deadline. This is a good thing. In the meantime, there are legitimate issues of living conditions that need to be addressed. Water, sewer, sewage, power, that sort of thing. facilities for the disabled. And there does need to be progress made, because as long as the residents are there, for however long they're there, living conditions need to be good, and they need to be stable.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like unanimous consent to introduce into the record two documents, testimony by Colonel Wesley Martin before the House of Commons in Canada on May 15th, 2012, a second document by him regarding some issues of the MEK and some questions and facts regarding that issue. I'd like unanimous consent to put this in a record.
Without objection,
I yield back.
joined by Brad Sherman, our colleague from California. Mr. Sherman, you may take as much time as you so find appropriate.
First, I want to thank the chairman for letting me participate. I'm not a member of the subcommittee. It may have already been introduced in the record, but if not, I'd like unanimous consent to introduce in this record a letter to Secretary Clinton signed by David Phillips, the Brigadier General, Wesley Martin, the retired colonel, and Leo Mikulski, the lieutenant colonel, retired, all in reference to this matter and dated April 19th.
Okay. Without objection, so ordered. And let me remind my colleague that this hearing will be over after the testimony and then questions and answers. We'll have a second round. Mr. Carnahan should have a chance to, hopefully, to ask his questions after these questions, and immediately after this hearing is adjourned, General David Phillips, who you just quoted in the letter, will be briefing us in this spot for those who would be interested. And you may proceed.
Hearing followed by a briefing. Who says Congress isn't fun? We had on May 8th the U.S. Court of Appeals dealing with the writ of mandamus on the MEK. First of all, Ambassador, are you aware of any other circumstance where a district court has issued a writ of mandamus on an issue of foreign policy directed at the State Department? Is this as extraordinary as an action as the courts have ever taken on a foreign policy matter?
My experience in those sort of legal proceedings is limited. I do gather that it is somewhat unusual.
Somewhere between highly unusual and utterly unprecedented would be the way I would characterize it. Now, during that proceeding, the lawyer for the State Department said the MEK did not permit an inspection. They did not permit a door-to-door inspection looking for caches of weapons or to actually disarm door-to-door. Since then, a letter has been signed by the soldiers actually involved in that searching effort, the Brigadier General, the Colonel, and the Lieutenant Colonel, all basically saying that the State Department lawyer lied to the court. Has the State Department taken action to make sure that the court has been advised that this lawyer that had no direct knowledge of the of what actually happened on the ground at Camp Ashraf said some statements to the court that might mislead the court as to the actual events?
Sir, this is a matter under active litigation, and so I have to be very careful. I said earlier, in response to a similar question, that it is my understanding that the Department of Justice has sent a letter to the court answering some of the questions. I believe that that letter has been filed and is available, but because it is active litigation, I have to restrain myself and not go any further.
Do you disagree with the three officers involved that, in fact, a proper door-to-door search for weapons was, in fact, conducted at Camp Ashraf?
Here, too, I believe that the letter from the Department of Justice addresses these issues, and because Sir, I'm in an awkward position. This is active litigation. It's taking place in federal court, and so my mandate is to try to get people safely out of Camp Ashraf, over to Camp Huria, and out of Iraq. That's my job. And I hope that the Department of Justice letter can clear all that up.
So your ultimate goal is to get them out of Iraq. Is that relocation facilitated by the designation of the MEK as a foreign terrorist organization? Or is it impeded by that designation?
The Secretary of State's decision on the designation will be made on the basis of the facts and the law, not on even my own
Yeah,
considerations.
and I didn't ask you what she's going to do or what she should do. I just asked whether the current situation impedes you and your stated goal. I mean, there may be other reasons why that designation is maintained, but as long as it's maintained, does it impede you in achieving your goal?
I have to work with the designation as long as it exists,
We know that.
and I will do my best to work with what I've got. That decision will be made apart from my office. Secretary Clinton did say on February 29th that MEK cooperation in the closure of Camp Ashraf will be a key factor in any decision. And it's also my understanding that the State Department is prepared to make that decision within 60 days of the closure of Camp Ashraf.
Is there anything in the statute that says you have to cooperate in moving into what could very well be an Iraqi government plan for a death camp in order not to be designated a terrorist organization? I've read the statute, and there's no I mean, there are lots of organizations around the world that are not cooperating in their relocation, and that is not a factor, under the statute at least, in designating an organization a foreign terrorist organization. My wife wants me to move, or us to move. I don't want to move. I'm not willing to move. Have you designated me yet?
Right. I wouldn't think of interfering in your wife's designation in any way.
But the point I'm making is there any legal basis to in effect require relocation in order to not be designated or continue to be designated a terrorist organization?
Here, too, the question you raised is very close to the issues that are now being litigated, so I've got to stand back. Not actually my nature to do so, but it is it is required of me that I stand back because this is active litigation.
Well, it's active litigation as to which the court was misled by the State Department's attorney. It's active litigation as to which the State Department appears to be using designation as terrorist organization in order to push for policy changes that have nothing to do with whether one is a terrorist organization or not. You won't admit it on the record, but you certainly haven't argued against my belief that the fact that the MEK is designated impairs your efforts to get people relocated outside of Iraq. And if you have an argument against that conclusion, I'll give you a chance to, and I don't see you grabbing the microphone, so I'll go on, unless you do want to grab the microphone.
I won't argue against that assertion, but I will say that the efforts of all those who want to see the residents of Ashraf safe and secure and out of Iraq. That effort will be enhanced and advanced if we work together to help the process move along as it has moved along since December. The last convoys need to leave Camp Ashraf for Camp Huria. Camp Ashraf should be closed. The international community needs to step up and do its part to help people get out. And since I think it is important that all those who agree that this should be the objective ought to be working together to achieve that objective. And it's my hope that we can work together in that direction.
The chairman's been very generous, and I'll just conclude by saying it's by no means clear that this relocation is not an Iraqi government first step toward mass executions. But in any case, what is clear is that many of the countries in the world to which people may be relocated are democracies. And let me tell you, it would be extremely difficult for the immigration minister of any democracy to admit any person from this camp while the organization is designated by the great United States as a foreign terrorist organization. So if you're able to relocate anybody while that designation remains in place, you are doing the near impossible. But I'm not sure you can do the near impossible thousands of times, and we've got thousands of people to relocate. Mr. Chairman, thank you for this indulgence.
Yes, Mr. Sherman. We have with us Congressman Rivera, a member of this subcommittee, and he is recognized for what time he may choose to consume.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador, thank you very much for being here today. I'm wondering if you could apprise the committee on two issues. One is inspections, particularly State Department inspections, the status or history or evolution of State Department inspections. And second, this issue of the belongings, the personal belongings of those in Camp Ashraf, and as well as these reports of confiscations and lootings and so forth. So let's start off with the inspections.
I have to, as I've said earlier before you came in, sir, that because there is active litigation going on about Camp Ashraf and about some of these issues, I have to be extraordinarily careful. The mandate of my office is to help move people in safety and security from Ashraf to Camp Liberty, now called Camp Huria, and from Camp Huria out of Iraq. The issue of Camp Ashraf and inspections and all of that business is the subject of letters and motions. There is a long history to that. It's partly during the many years we had troops in Iraq, it was the Department of Defense that was responsible. The State Department, during my time responsible for this issue, has devoted its energies to working on the priorities I mentioned, that is the convoys from Ashraf to Huria, and the living conditions at Huria, and support of the UN mission, which is to help get these people out of Iraq. So the issue is being handled. The issue of inspections is being handled in another venue. I regret any expenditure of energy which will not advance the process I laid out. Our priority, it seems to me, should be to get people from Ashraf to Liberty and from Liberty out of Iraq, and to do so as quickly as we can, safely, and with consideration for basic, decent human standards.
Are you saying because of this ongoing litigation or these litigation concerns, you can't even comment or apprise the committee as to the facts, just in what has happened? I imagine it's not a secret, what's happened in the past. What has gone on with inspections?
It is, because this is, I mentioned a Department of Justice letter in the past couple of days, which has been filed with the court, which I believe answers some of these questions. I find it frustrating that a perfectly normal question, which is what you've asked, is because it is the subject of, because the topic is being litigated right now, is more difficult for me to answer than I would like. But that's the odd position we're in, and I will say again, I regret the diversion of energy into an issue which does not advance the cause of my office and my department, which is helping people out of Iraq in safety and security.
And the letter that you recently said, is that not a letter?
It's a Department of Justice letter, and it is part of the court filing, but I believe
Is that not public record?
I mention it because I understand it has been filed with the court and therefore is the public record, yes.
Do you want to apprise the committee of the contents of that letter?
Well, that's because it is a Department of Justice letter. Let me just refer, to it's available. I have to be very careful where matters of open litigation in the court are concerned.
Tell me about the belongings issue.
That is the issue of cargo property and movable property has been one of the most contentious issues throughout the process of moving from Camp Ashraf to Camp Liberty. The residents of Camp Ashraf have taken to Liberty enormous quantities of personal effects, computers, some cars, furniture. They are online, they're communicating by email, so a lot of their personal property has been moved. It is also true that it's the intent, we understand it's the intent of the residents of Camp Ashraf to sell much of their movable property. There are a large number of cars. It's their intention to sell it. I believe that an Iraqi businessman has already been to Ashraf and looked over some of this property. It continues to be an issue of some debate and disagreement between the residents of Ashraf and the Iraqi authorities. That is, what can be transported, what is personal property, are street lamps personal property, what about vehicles, what about generators? These things come up frequently. The UN, with our support, has done its best to mediate arrangements for the transport of necessary property. They've made some progress. In other areas, more progress needs to be made. But you're absolutely right that this is one of the issues that is part of the tough negotiations with each and every convoy. Progress has been made, but there is more to do, including on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We have joining us today another member, not a member of the subcommittee, but a respected member of the House. And I would yield to Ms. Sheila Jackson-Lee 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, let me thank you for your kindness and certainly the kindness of ranking member for allowing me to proceed today. Thank you. Let me also thank you for your good works on this issue. It certainly has been a very long journey, and I think America can take heart that there are sometimes a number of unique issues that there is bipartisan unity and concern that has been expressed by this committee. To Ambassador Freed, let me thank you for your service. I think we have not been on the phone, but we have been on the phone in the past. And I think you can understand, I've heard a little bit of members questioning and don't want to attribute frustration to their questioning, but I think you can assume that there is a great deal of frustration as to where we are. And so I'd like to start, first of all, well, however we may have determined it, whether we got it by word of mouth, whether or not there are other means, can we establish as a U.S. government that the residents of Camp Ashraf and those who have been relocated are disarmed or without arms?
As I said, I've got to be extraordinarily careful and cautious because some of these issues are matters under litigation. It is true as a matter of the historical record that during the period when the United States had troops in Iraq, we judged that the camp was largely disarmed with no heavy equipment. That took place some years ago. This issue, I have to say, came up suddenly. 3 weeks ago, it was not on my list of things to worry about. On my list of things to worry about are the completion of the convoys from Ashraf to Liberty in safety so that Ashraf can be closed, and very much on the mind of the U.S. Embassy in Iraq and the UN and the State Department generally is the issue of finding ways for the people at Camp Liberty to leave Iraq in safety and security. And that's where our efforts, that's where we want to put the bulk of our efforts. We've come this far, we're not there yet. We need to finish this process, and that's going to take a lot of work. Anything that drives us backwards, I'm against. Anything that moves us forward, I'm for.
I can totally agree with that. So let me do this without putting you in the crosshairs. I think it is very important to clear up the representation that has now taken to the airwaves and to places far beyond this room. Because the good work that you are trying to do, the good work that members have tried to encourage, some having visited the region, should not be now either tainted or undermined by the cybersphere, meaning something has gone into massive airwaves, massive hearing, and massive understanding, and it makes it very difficult. And so let me proceed in my questioning, and so I'm making an official request on the record to have that clarified. If you're not able to clarify it today, and whatever methods have to be utilized, we need to have that clarified. And I say that because we do know remaining at Camp Ashraf are families, or I believe they're children, but just by the nature of humanity, I know there are people who are frail, who are not as well as others, and need to have an orderly departure from the present status. So if I missed it, I apologize to my colleagues. Do you have an inventory of individuals who are left in terms of age, health conditions, children, new births, etc.? Do we have any of that?
We do have an approximate profile of the residents. There are few, if any, children, and I have heard of no births in many years, if ever. We do have a profile. There are some who are disabled and require special care, and that has been one legitimate concern, that they be given the support they need. We are learning more about the people at Camp Huria as the interviews proceed. As I said earlier, and at the end of March at a conference in Geneva, I announced that the United States would be receiving referrals from the UNHCR and looking at them on an individual basis. We need to step up and do our part to show that we're part of the solution in all ways, not just moving people from Huria to, not just moving people from Camp Ashraf to Camp Huria, but out, and we have to show leadership. And I will be frank, the support of the Congress in this is critical, and I thank you for it. I really do. And I thank the chairman for his support.
Mr. Chairman, could I conclude? I see you moving on that button. Can I conclude with just one roundup, if I can get it rounded up? Again, I may have missed the answer, but I believe we want to do right. It looks like we've been talking about the safety and security for Camp Ashraf for a very long time. I served on this committee, have been serving for a while, and certainly not the time frame of my chairman, but had the privilege of having been able to serve, but I also serve on Homeland Security. So this has been in the eye of the storm for a very long time. Could you give us today a date when you will complete, or there will be a completion of those, at least out of Camp Ashraf into Camp Haraya, and then the process of relocating? What can we look forward to? And I will end by this last point. I see a light at the end of the tunnel, potentially. I know that you're very sensitive. I'm a lawyer to an ongoing case. But let me just publicly say, I want every manner of vetting to occur. We have Iran and the oppression of Iran in our eye. The world has it in their eye. These individuals are Iranians. However, the MEK now remains as maybe the existing opposition and resistance, but I don't know whether anyone can document today, on this day, that they are terrorists. Whatever process we can move along, we will be far better off if we are assuredly having vetted them and moved them off the terrorist list. This will aid in any manner of things that I think we're all trying to do. So I'll just make that point, but let me, you look hesitant to comment, but let me just try to get a definitive time frame that you think the removal of these individuals or the relocating of these individuals can occur.
I can't give you a precise time frame because the movement of convoys is beyond our control, but let me try to be responsive to your question as best I can. Convoys have been about 400 persons, a little less than 400 persons per convoy. We've had 5 convoys, almost 2,000 people. The convoy started in February, so that's 4 months, 5 convoys. We don't know, assuming there are between 3,200 and 3,400 people at Camp Ashraf, that means 3+ convoys. The Camp Ashraf leaders suggested once the convoys could be a little bigger to get out faster. They made that suggestion at one point. Let's say 3 more convoys. How fast they move depend on a lot of factors beyond our control. But if you do the math, right, 5 convoys, 4 months, 3 convoys remaining, you can, at that point your math is as good as mine. Then there's at least this is knowable. We can have an educated way to frame up the timing. Much less knowable is the issue of resettlement, and it is important that this process begin. The people at Camp Liberty, at Camp Huria, ought to see that there is a way out. They're out of Camp Huria in safety and security. There have been a few that have left, but these are individuals, and we need to see that process moving ahead. That's where my office, that's where the Department of State is putting its efforts, working with the UN, the UNHCR, and other interested governments. That will increasingly be and should be our priority. You said it well, ma'am. Light at the end of the tunnel, an old cliche, but it works for this. But we're not going to get there on autopilot. It's going to take at least as much work to have a good outcome as we've put into it so far. That work we're prepared to do, and it's my hope that everyone will look forward and find ways to move this ahead while we can.
Mr. Chairman, I cannot thank you enough for your kindness, and I'll just say to you as I inquire of this committee, whatever we can do, those of us who you've been courteous enough to extend time to, to join in the delisting of the MEK. I think that will go a long way for the resettlement of those who are now in Camp Ashraf. I just heard Ambassador Fried, who I take at his word, and I'm going to compliment the administration for still staying in the fight and moving these individuals along. But
Thank you.
if there is any hindrance by Iraq that stops a convoy from moving faster than under 4 months, let's find out what that is. And if there's any hindrance in now moving to the next step of delisting the MEK for many reasons, I hope that we can work together in a bipartisan way to provide some assistance from the Congress to move this along and move it along now.
Thank you very much,
I yield back.
Ms. Jackson-Lee, and we are grateful for your involvement in this issue. Couple of notes from the chairman, that's me. Well, how about this, Mr. Ambassador? You were at the UNHCR meeting in Geneva in March, and it was a gathering of countries that are usually receptive to refugees. In your testimony, you hint at bringing some MEK members to the United States, as well as a show of leadership by doing that. That was what you mentioned, I believe. You said show of leadership, which is accurate. I believe you raised this point in Geneva, and in regard to those MEK members who have relatives in the United States under the humanitarian parole process. What reaction did you receive in Geneva to this reaching out on the part of the United States?
I believe there was a good reaction. That is, the UNHCR appreciated the fact that the United States was ready to stand up and declare our willingness to do our part. Other governments expressed their willingness to at least consider taking in people. Now, a year ago, I'm told, there was much less willingness. So I think a lot of governments have looked at this, looked at it again, and decided that we need to move forward. I still think that U.S. leadership will be needed. The administration is preparing to look at UNHCR referrals on an, I should say, on an interagency basis, not just State Department, but Department of Justice, FBI, Homeland Security. We're looking at this.
What would you say the Congress can do to help facilitate this, besides, of course, not asking you pointed questions?
I welcome pointed questions in service of a good cause, believe me.
It's the pointed answers we don't get back that we're worried about, but that's okay.
Far be it from me to suggest what Congress should do, but a general support for this aspect of the whole process. That is, if the United States is going to review referrals from the UNHCR consistent with applicable U.S. law, which is our intention, I think any sign of bipartisan support from the Congress for this course of action would be enormously encouraging, not just for us. It's not that we need the thanks. It's that other governments will look at us, and if they see that even in an election year, the executive branch and the Congress, on a bipartisan basis, are determined to do the right thing and move forward, that, I am convinced, will be a powerful and welcome signal. It'll help break this free and allow us to move forward.
Obviously, I agree with that assessment. Whenever the United States Congress and the administration, the Republican and Democrat, work together, we are a powerful force in the world. Let me just say, obviously, the point that Ms. Jackson-Lee just made, as well as has been made by the other members of the committee, that that you are not really able to fully focus on, for whatever reasons I understand, that taking them off the terrorist list, we all believe would facilitate this solution that we're talking about, and would also have an incredible impact overseas. Let me just say, in passing on this, that this issue's been discussed. We realize just from your answers, you know, there's limitations about what you can say. But my belief is that, and I'm not condemning you for this. I'm saying that you are a good soldier. You are a troubleshooter. It comes in, tries to help our country get out of messes that somebody else created. I understand that, but I think that our State Department is being overly sensitive to the feelings of murderous regimes that are now in power in Iraq and Iran. And I say murderous regimes because I was kicked out of Iraq along with my CODEL after bringing up the Camp Ashraf murders to President Maliki, who just didn't want to hear about that. I think that ignoring the slaughter of innocent people is not going to make things better when you're dealing with regimes like Iraq and Iran. I understand they're still in power there, and thus we've got other thousands of people to be concerned about. The thousands of people at Camp Ashraf, you know, if we hurt their feelings, maybe they'll go and slaughter those people too. So I understand you're trying to save lives, but I think that people who are engaged in such activity don't really respect it when you're overly sensitive to their feelings. It seems to me that what we're talking about, Ms. Lee, is that there's been a dishonorable deal made somewhere along the line in our, not this administration, not who knows, last administration, who knows when, but there's been a dishonorable deal somewhere along the line with the mullah regime in Iran that we will not support the opponents of the regime. And I think that was very indicative or very demonstrable when the Arab Spring demonstrations in Tehran were taking place. Our government was noticeably silent in support for those demonstrators in the streets of Tehran against the mullah dictatorship. And I think that that same kind of that indicates that there was some sort of understanding reached with the mullahs. And of course, now a part of that understanding could well be that we will not be supporting the MEK in any way, which the mullahs look as very symbolic to people who are resisting their dictatorship. If indeed such a deal has been struck, which people are trying to enforce now while saving the lives of these MEK people, it was a dishonorable deal to begin with. And I know how difficult it would be then at this point to try to save the lives of these people and still keep that deal if the mullahs look at the MEK as they do as opponents to the regime. And as, you know, what's the difference between a freedom fighter and a terrorist? Well, there is a difference between a freedom fighter and a terrorist. Freedom fighters want to institute freedom and democracy and fight soldiers, and terrorists kill innocent people in order to terrorize populations into submission. A little bit about, before we hang up here, we're talking about the fly in the ointment here, from what I'm understanding from your testimony, is that the people of Camp Ashraf, who are still there, have said they don't want to leave unless there's an inspection to verify that there aren't any weapons there. Now, why in the world would someone, you know, like that, in that situation, make that demand? Well, I think that's totally rational. And maybe you can tell me where I'm wrong, but we have a situation where, well, first of all, if once they leave, they have to realize who then would verify that there aren't any weapons. It would have to be the Iraqis or the Iranians who would be verifying that, which of course would be unacceptable. I mean, you can't believe whatever they would tell you. They may well plant weapons. The other thing is that the residents of Camp Ashraf remember full well when our government had made an agreement to protect them. And they remember full well that our troops were asked to retire and leave the area just prior to a genocidal attack of Iraqi troops in which you had innocent people slaughtered. Over 35 people were murdered, 300 were wounded, and our troops withdrew right before that attack. Now, that would kind of eat at people's ability to maybe just trust us that we're going to do the right thing. And then maybe that's the reason you want to make sure that this is verified while they still have a chance to verify it. And by the way, this subcommittee has been denied permission to investigate that incident. We've been denied the ability, this is the Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee, who's been denied the right to investigate this slaughter of people who were under the protection of the United States government. And we've been denied that, as well as a number of other aspects of the MEK listing as a terrorist organization. So I'm sure none of these were decisions that you made years ago, but now they've thrown you into the position of having to come here and face this questioning and answer with the type of answers that you've given us today. I wish you luck. I wish you success. I hope that we get these people out of there and we get them over to Camp Liberty, and then we get them to countries around the world that will accept them. And with everything I just said, I know what a tough job you've got, and we're going to work with you, but we're still going to put this administration and our government on the spot when they make decisions like the one we're talking about that lead us to this situation. So,
Chairman.
all right, you want to?
Introduce
Yes,
them.
I'd be happy to yield for a moment.
So, Chairman, I know from your heart you're looking forward to working with the administration and trying to get something done. If I might ask unanimous consent that may put a light on this. Obviously, I'm not reading a classified document, but I think it's a document that you read, and that is the Wall Street Journal, dated May the 14th, 2012. Iran exile group nears U.S. rebirth. State Department is moving to take MEK off ban list at risk of angering Iran. And if I might just briefly say, as I submit just one page into the record, ask unanimous consent, the Obama administration is moving to remove an Iranian opposition group from the State Department's terrorism list, say officials briefed on the talks, in an action that could further, they use the word poison, Washington's relations with Tehran at a time of renewed diplomatic efforts to curtail Iran's nuclear program. I think the basis of it is that there is a rumor, and I'd like to ask unanimous consent to put this in the record and hope that this will ultimately bear fruit. But it is from the Wall Street Journal.
With no objection, so ordered. And with that said, I might note to my colleague, she wasn't here when this was announced, that at the minute that this hearing is going to be adjourned, which should be within 30 seconds of now, it will be adjourned, but we will have a briefing by General David Phillips, who oversaw security at Camp Ashraf, to give us a briefing on what he knows about this issue. So with that, thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you for coming.
Mr. Chairman.
And this hearing is adjourned. I might now ask if it would be possible for General David Phillips to brief us on some information, and I would ask those who are leaving the room to do so as quickly as possible so we can get on with the briefing.